Welcome to another edition of Great Health, Abundant Happiness, and Outrageous Love. Just doing a little walk down here beside the river. Still a pretty good flow this late in the season. It's interesting to see, isn't it?
It is. September, we've seen quite a few crowds. We saw a really large one, too, for this location.
Yeah, you're becoming a real good trout spot.
That was a rainbow trout. It was beautiful.
Yeah, it was. What do you want to talk about, hon?
Well, as you know, Jeffrey and I love to talk about relationships, and the book that we're writing really has a heavy focus on relationships. Specifically the relationship between two people. It doesn't have to be a marriage. It can be any type of partnership, that you're involved in. Because really, I don't want to call them rules, but the keys to success for those relationships are the same, whether you're married or living together or dating or whatever, again, your, dynamics are.
Right. Makes sense.
So, we've been asked a lot, like, well, when should I give up? And then, or should I continue to make it work?
Because a lot of people give up too soon. I mean, that's why a lot of people ask about that. I mean, there are things that you can't put up with, which I think you want to talk about, but, people do give up too soon. And, the old saying is winners really never give up, or rarely give up in this case, right?
Exactly. And it's never too late, even for marriages that have, resulted in a divorce, you can always go back and remarry that person. You obviously love them so much that you married them. So once you get back to that place of self-love, you will remember all of those reasons. But, when would be a time that you wouldn't, make it work, that you would just call it quits and, throw the towel in? And again, if you watch any of our videos, when it comes to relationships, we rarely think there's an opportunity for that. However, there is one key element that I think both Jeff and I think is really important, that if this exists in your relationship, the relationship needs to end immediately. And that is if one or both parties in the relationship are abusive. This includes if they're abusive towards you or towards themselves. So, for example, towards you, it's the obvious. It could be a verbal abuse, it could be a physical abuse, a mental abuse, spiritual abuse, anything like that, any type of abuse. We all know when we're being abused. Many of us will make an excuse for it and say that's just because he or she loves me so much. Abuse is never, ever okay. So that would be a time to leave. And then if he or she is abusive to themselves, for example, if they're abusing alcohol or drugs or gambling or sex, or the list goes on and on, the relationship needs to end immediately. Otherwise, you become the enabler in the relationship. And the beautiful thing is that some people turn it around. You can always go back to the relationship and revisit that person that you initially fell in love with and that fell in love with you. And you can do that at any point, as long as that person has gotten the correct help and they are on the road to recovery. And I know recovery is different for all different kinds of self-abuse. So
I think some people may have questions too, because I'm thinking as you're saying this, others out there might say, well, where do you draw the line for abuse, specifically like verbal abuse? Obviously, everyone knows physical abuse. That it can't be tolerated at all. But people do argue, and hopefully they don't call each other names. But people say stupid things when they have arguments. So it's like where is it abusive and where is it just a stupid argument? I mean, that's a tough one, I guess, right?
Exactly. And I think if this is a consistent situation, then it's verbal abuse. If it's an occasional disagreement that gets heightened to a point where maybe neither of you are proud of things you said, that's a totally different story.
None of that's good, but people are human and they make mistakes.
We make mistakes. That's different than actual verbal abuse. And so, you might also ask, well, if my partner's abusing him or herself, shouldn't I stay with them while they're getting the help that they need? My answer to that would be no. You need to separate from them in order to give them all of the space and time and brain power that they need to change their path.
Well, again, I think that would be a lot of questions about where do you draw the line. Like, let's just say if someone was having trouble with alcohol, for instance, and they went and got help and they had to go through a program. You wouldn't recommend leaving in a situation like that if the person was on the right path.
If they're already in the program and they're acknowledging the help, then, I think there are situations where you can stand by them and wait for them to complete the program and get on the right path, as long as your involvement with them is separate from the program, because that is their issue and not your issue, and you can't own any of it. And that's so important, because anybody that's had a family member or a friend or a partner or a loved one that has any type of self-abusive addiction, that it's all up to them. And sometimes out of love, we think we're helping them, and we're not. We're enabling them. So, I think that's really the only time. And then, we've gotten questions. Well, what if my partner becomes really negative and I'm a positive person? I don't want to be around that. Or what if my partner becomes sad? Or what if my partner, starts to lie? Or if my partner cheats? Here's the deal with those things. None of those are absolute deal breakers to end a relationship if they can be worked through. Now, if you have a negative partner that is using it as an abusive tactic to bring down your positivity, that's abuse. So you really, and again, I'm not talking about if they're negative one day. If they're abusing your attitude, or you, or your mental state or spirituality on a daily basis.
You're saying if it affects you in a negative way.
Well, if you say something to me, that's going to affect me. But if you say it once, but if you're doing it on a constant basis, that becomes an abusive behavior.
It can be, but we teach a lot on nobody can control your attitude and your view of the world, but you're just saying if it's so bad, it's really affecting you and you can't get around it. But for the most part, you guys all get this. It's hard when you're around a bunch of negative people to have a great time, but you should be able to do that. At the end of the day, my perception, Karen's perception, your perception of what's going on around us is our own perception. That's what we perceive. And so you shouldn't allow people to change that at all. However, it is tough. I'm just clarifying that you're saying if you can't get around that.
And I'm talking about a consistent, ongoing behavior that just can't be changed. I'll give you a personal example of Jeffrey and I is, we've had a lot of tragic situations, through our marriage, including several miscarriages. And, after the miscarriages, I know that I retreated to a very deep, dark, sad place. And obviously that's something that I needed to work through myself. I was so blessed to have Jeffrey standing by, and I'm sure he was going through the same things, but different, right? It's very different for a man and a woman just because, we carry the baby, but that doesn't mean that their sadness is any less. But what I've seen often is that, one partner will try to lift the other partner up, and the partner needs to go through that experience and, those steps to get back to themselves. So, if you've got a partner who's sad like that, that is definitely not a reason to separate. That's a reason to grow closer and let them know that you are there for them and you will always be there for them. You can't fix what's going on for them, and that has to be done within them, but you're there for them. And that's the real difference between that and like a self-abusive person using drugs or alcohol or gambling or sex addiction or
whatever. There's a million of it. Right.
So we just wanted to talk about that because a lot of people are like, at what point do I throw the towel?
Right.
And I think that really answers the question.
And that should be a very small percentage of relationships. That's the issue, right? With breakups and divorce at over 50%. you know, a large portion of those probably shouldn't have happened. That's all. That's the point you're making.
Absolutely.
Right.
I agree 100%. Wishing you great health, abundant happiness, and outrageous love from Copper Mountain.